friends, welcome to the All-Canadian Reptile Girl. I'm Annaliese, and I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually. Who knows? Adopting a new pet of any kind is a big decision that requires a lot of consideration and research. That is, of course, assuming you want to have a healthy and happy pet. Each pet is different, and today I am covering the 8 questions you need to ask yourself before you bring a pet snake into your home. Let's go! Okay, so depending on the species, there are varying degrees of complexity involved in the care and keeping, and doing your own research for the specific species is crucial. You're going to have all sorts of questions about what they need and how to provide it. Really in the weeds stuff, you know? But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the questions you need to ask yourself that will be foundational to your success in keeping a pet snake, regardless of the species. And you need to be completely honest in your responses. So take a look in the mirror, admire your beauty, and ask yourself, am I okay with how big this snake will get? This is Tessara, my adult female Dumeril boa. She's a pretty heavy-bodied snake, and she might look really big, but hello, darling. But honestly, at just under 6.5 feet long, Tessara here is nothing to write home about in terms of big snakes. But she's hefty enough that most non-reptile folks would consider her to be pretty darn big. Certainly big enough to make my point. So, here's Tessara, an adult Dumeril boa. And this might be what you see at an expo or reptile shop. This is one of Tessara's babies. She's about 9 months old, and as you can see, she's very little compared to Mama. You can fit this entire snake in just Tessara's head for scale. If you're not experienced with snakes, here, just before I go any further, look at that. If you're not experienced with snakes, or even if you are, maybe, it can be hard to reconcile the difference in the moment when you're only looking at this. You may hear the seller tell you that they get 6, 7 feet and 30 plus pounds, but when you're standing there and holding this adorable little sausage, it takes thought and imagination to really get it. And remember, Tessara is not even that big. Baby retics aren't much longer than this when we, and can routinely top 15 or even 20 plus feet when full grown. You really need to try and envision your little snake hundreds of times bigger than what's in your hand at the shop or reptile expo. You also need to know the max size you are in for and expect and prepare for that. Don't assume it will be on the small size or average. What's the worst case scenario, so to speak? Online sources at the time said male Macklot's pythons are supposed to be 6-7 feet long, which is why we thought Hobbs was full grown and already a big boy when we first got him, and he was just over 7 feet long. Well, in the 3 years since, Hobbs is yet to stop growing, and he is now over 8.5 feet long, more than 40% bigger than the bottom of the reported male size range. His tongue just went directly into my ear, ew, and more than 20% bigger than the upper end. Get a handle on how big the animal can potentially get, even if it's rare that they get that size, and check in with yourself. Are you comfortable engaging with an animal that size? You have the room for an enclosure that a snake that size is going to need in a year, in 5 years? Are you physically capable of handling the snake when it's full grown? If you're getting a corn snake, that's no big deal. If you're getting a Burmese python,
think it through.
Oh, hi. Okay, next question, I guess. How long can you keep it? Snakes aren't short-lived pets. Many species can live decades, way longer than just a fleeting interest. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Are you buying a snake for one of your kids? You're probably signing them up for a pet that they will have well into their adulthood, if it's well taken care of, obviously. If you're young and or living at home, when you get your snake, can you take it with you when you go away to school or out on your own? Are you saddling your folks with a bunch of your pets when you leave the house? Hi, you guys, you're very cute. Oh, Tessara, look at how sweet you are.
Seriously.
have you got the cash to keep it? In terms of expensive pets, snakes aren't that bad. While some species or specialty morphs can be really expensive to buy, generally you can get a great pet snake for way less than you'd buy some conventional pets. They're not expensive to feed, to get them set up properly is not too terribly costly for most entry-level snakes anyway. They aren't going to chew your furniture or designer shoes or electronics. Over the life of your pet, they're likely to be way less expensive than, say, a dog or cat. But they are going to cost you money. Can you afford it? Not just the regular care, but for unexpected costs too. What happens if you accidentally bust the glass of their tank? Can you afford to get a new one in short order? Can you afford vet costs? I'm gonna talk more about vets in a minute. But in terms of planning costs, are you able to set aside money for that? I am immensely grateful for my patrons. Their support helps me out a ton in this respect, but not everyone is fortunate enough or in a position to start a YouTube channel and grow it to a point where there are enough cool people willing to lend their support. I am super fortunate, but times are tough out there. Things cost more now than they used to, and lots of folks are struggling to varying degrees, and I don't think it's likely to get better anytime soon. Can you comfortably afford a snake is a serious question that deserves an honest answer. So, we have covered if you are comfortable with the size snake you're getting, if you can keep it for its entire life, and if you can afford it. Now we need to answer, is it legal for me to keep this snake? Depending on where you live, there may be restrictions on the kinds of pets you're allowed to keep. It might be laws that apply to your entire state or province, or county, or maybe it's a municipal bylaw. Regardless, you need to make sure your snake is legal to keep and that you stay current, because sometimes laws change. I've talked about it several times before. There are very well-funded, well-organized groups that are making a lot of money fleecing well-meaning animal lovers and use some of that money for lobbying municipal, state, provincial, and federal legislation to ban reptiles and other specialty pets. This is why organizations like USARK and CanHerp up here in Canada are so important and need our support. They provide alerts when new legislation is proposed and fight for our rights as keepers. But that's not what this is about. This is about knowing what is legal to keep where you live. Check your state, provincial, or local animal control rules and your municipal bylaws. Oh, and just because you can buy a snake at a store in your city does not necessarily mean it is legal to keep the snake in that city. Depending on where you live, there may be different municipal bylaws that govern retail sales of species and the keeping of that very same species in a particular city. Reptile shops service customers outside of the city they are in, online maybe, or to folks who live in areas with less restrictions that make the drive in. So don't assume that just because you can buy a ball python from a store in your town that you are legally allowed to keep it. But those same shops, if they are knowledgeable and reputable, can be a good resource into what is and isn't legal to keep in your area if you have trouble finding the rules. Can I find someone to care for it when I'm away? Having a pet complicates vacations, or travel for work, or school, or maybe it's not even travel. Maybe you need to have an extended stay at a hospital. Whatever it is, if you have a pet and you aren't going to be around, you do need to have a plan. For some pets, maybe you can take them with you on vacation. Probably not to the hospital. Think. Who knows? Some pets you can easily find boarding for. Not always a great option if your pet is a snake. Now, snakes don't need a lot of daily work. They're perfectly happy being left alone for extended periods of time. But you still need someone to check to make sure that their heat is working properly, they have water, and can feed them if you're gone for long enough. Do you have a friend or family member that is willing and able to do that? Can you hire someone? Add that to the cost question. You need to know what you're going to do to make sure your pet is cared for when you are away. Can I feed it? So, two things to consider here. One is logistics. Do you have a reliable source of food for your snake? Food for your corn snake or ball python should be pretty easy for most folks to get. Feeder rodents are fairly accessible. But what if you're looking at an egg-eating snake that you might need smaller eggs than you can get at your local grocery store? What if you have a green anaconda? Not something I would recommend as a first snake, in case you were wondering. It's just, for most people, no. A snake like that will eventually need to eat pigs. Do you have access to the appropriate food to put in front of your snake weekly or bi-weekly or quarterly, whatever the cadence is? Can you physically get the food? The other angle here is, can you feed it? As a thinking, feeling human being, are you up for this? Are you afraid of getting bit during feeding? More on that in a minute. Do you get anxiety when startled? A big-ish snake going from motionless to a strike and coil in the blink of an eye can be very startling, even when you know it's coming. Some people aren't cool with that. Are you okay with feeding cute, fuzzy little animals, alive or dead, to your snake? This may seem silly to some, circle of life after all, but this is something that I completely understand. Before I had all these reptiles, I had a trio of rats. They were sisters and so clever, affectionate, curious. They were wonderful, and when they passed away, I was devastated. Sometimes the frozen thawed rats that I take out of my freezer remind me of Boots abandoned in Blizzard. That chili rat could have made an awesome, loving pet. Processing those feelings, which are perfectly okay to have, can be emotionally tough for some people, which is, again, perfectly okay. If you can't handle the cuteness of a furry animal disappearing down a snake's gullet, then maybe just a snake is not the right pet for you. And that is okay. But you should really take this into account before you have your snake at home and your salty tears are dripping into the bowl you're thawing your rat in, eh? Am I okay with getting bit? Venomous or really big snakes aside, most snake bites are pretty innocuous, little scratches at most, and that's a good thing, because it is going to happen eventually. When you bring a snake into your home, it could take a bit of time for them to settle in and trust you.
You have to let me out! No, not until Stockholm Syndrome sets in.
And in that time, they may be defensive or bitey. While most can be pretty easily tamed down, some snakes just never come around. Defensive bites or strikes can and do happen, despite our best efforts. Heck, it might not even be a bite. The only person that Hobbs has ever drawn blood with was my mom. He likes to kind of smoosh his face into you as he moves around, and he did that while winding around my mom's neck. And a tooth happened to snag her at the side of his mouth. It sliced across her jugular, and she's bleeding and confused. Hobbs is confused. It was barely. I had to use a magnifying glass to see it.
Are you done? Well, Hobbs actually did bite Dad that one time.
Oh yeah, he missed the tongs, you're right.
Yeah, when they were feeding.
That actually works really well. It leads me into my next bit. Accidental bites. Snakes sometimes get excited at feeding time and overshoot the target and hit your hand. Maybe your hand is warmer than the rat and they key in on that instead. Maybe it's not even feeding day and you're reaching in with your warm, rat-sized hand and your snake figures, why not try something new? I have dozens of snakes in my home and have handled hundreds more at work. I've literally had thousands of interactions with snakes, and I've been bitten a handful of times. It should be pretty uncommon for reasonably good pet snakes, but it certainly happens, and odds are, eventually your snake will give you a toothy kiss. Can you handle that? Is it going to give you anxiety so you don't handle your snake, meaning it is not getting the proper socialization, and is more likely to bite again? Not cool. Before you bring your snake home, you really need to imagine yourself getting bitten. Visualize it, really commit. How do you feel about that? Last up is probably the thing you're going to run into the least, I hope. But if and when it comes up, it's likely the most important question to have asked yourself before getting a snake. Do I have access to a vet that can treat snakes? When I started keeping reptiles, I had a regular vet for our cats and assumed, incorrectly, that they would be who I'd take my snakes to. On a checkup with my cat, I asked my vet about bringing in Monty, I think it was, for a checkup, and was told quite emphatically that he is not a fan of snakes and does not treat them. He gave me a recommendation for a different vet that treats exotic pets. You see, to properly treat snakes and other reptiles, your normal, everyday vet is probably not going to cut it. You need an exotic vet trained in treating reptiles. Thankfully, the exotic vet that was recommended was not far away and is awesome. He's done an amazing job in treating both Hobbs and Jub my Tagu when they had health issues a little while back. But what if it was an emergency and I had to find out the hard way that my kitty vet couldn't help my reptiles? That could have ended very badly. Reptiles are really good at hiding health issues, and once it becomes apparent, it might be too late. Every minute counts. We should have made sure well in advance that we had an exotic vet. I got lucky. So ask yourself, is there an exotic vet that is reasonably close? They aren't everywhere. You might have to travel to get care. Going back to the cash question, can you afford them? Because they are specialized, they are often more expensive. My vet is actually very reasonable, but that's not always the case, and you may be paying significantly more to have your pet treated. Getting this sorted before you get your snake is really important, and still might leave you short. What happens if your vet is not available? Is there a backup in the area? A while back, Jub had an issue with her tongue. It turned black and got all swollen, and she couldn't really use it. It was hanging out of her mouth a little bit. Called my vet to find out that he was away. On to Google for an alternative vet, and the closest alternate exotic vet was almost 100 kilometers away from where I lived. So off we went. The experience was not good. The actual vet was very nice, but his assistant was borderline abusive. Jub's issue was thought to be an overdose of vitamin D, which made no sense based on what we feed her and how we supplement. They ran a bunch of blood tests to confirm and gave us some antibiotics, and prescribed a course of treatment pending the blood test results. The visit cost more than twice what it cost to buy Jub. With no improvement after a week and blood tests showing no indication of the suspected vitamin overdose, the backup vet had no answers and wanted to examine her again and run more expensive tests. Thankfully, Jub's regular vet, who, have I mentioned, is awesome, was back by then, and he quickly determined that she had bitten her tongue and the blackness and swelling was from an infection from that wound that the alternate did not see. We got the right antibiotics, and he showed me how to inject them into Jub. She was so good with that. Oh, she's amazing. And within days, she was showing huge improvements and quickly returned to normal. It was a very, very expensive lesson in the importance of a good backup vet, which I now have. The drive to Guelph to see them is kind of far, but I know that I have an amazing backup vet there if my regular vet is not available. You may not have the option for a backup vet, but you should at least know that going in and make the decision based on the actual situation, right? So that's it for today. Are there any other questions that you can think of that should have been included? Let me know in the comments. Thanks to you all for watching. Special thanks to my patrons for their support, and please just remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that. And until next time, remember to nurture all nature. Bye. Say goodbye to Sarah. She says goodbye. She also says, put me home, tag. Bye, everyone. For some pets, maybe you can take them with you. She's like cuddling under my chin. Oh. Well, she likes this. She seems to find this relaxing. Just this. She's been a bit grumpy today. I think it's the weather.
I think you just need to move her head.
No, this is adorable. Sweet.
But it looks like she's trying to strangle you. She could be
not.
sizing up your head in order to then swallow it whole.
Hobbs peed on my leg, and I knew it was gonna happen, and we're on the last side.